Good morning, Michael Cowley. Great to have you here today. Today is our special sort of spotlight on you in regard to asking you deep and meaningful questions from a lawyer's point of view. And nice to have you here again, Michael.
Morning, Mark. Thanks for asking me along to talk about structuring, one of my favourite subjects.
That's right. No, well, the questions today, yes, very much about structuring. And I was just saying before we started, it's amazing how many times we you run into people and they say, "Oh, I've just bought this new property, or I've just bought this new land, or this new house," and they bought it in their own name, or and they're just about to retire, and you think, "Gee, why did you, with all the money you're spending, did you not think to maybe just get a little bit of advice before you purchased it to work out how to best structure the asset so that from a succession planning point of view, from an estate planning point of view, from a asset protection point of view, most specifically, that you've sort of taken that into account." So anyway, so the number one theme before we even start the day is to say, please, if you're out to spend significant amounts of money and purchasing things, please listen to today. But even if you haven't got time to listen today, make sure you talk to Michael or someone in regard to how to best structure assets that you purchase. Is that a good way to start the session, Michael?
Absolutely perfect. I mean, my mantra is plan early, plan often, plan together. So the plan early is definitely don't take any major step before you've had advice from all the relevant people. And we used to talk about the golden triangle of the lawyer, the banker, and the accountant. But you've got all other sorts of advisors coming in as well. But definitely, before you purchase something, get some advice about structuring, because it can make a whole family's life a whole lot easier in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's just start at the top. In regard to the word structuring, what do you mean by that? And obviously, why is it important?
Yep. So when we're talking about structuring, we're talking about who owns the assets you have. So who owns the property? Who actually operates the business? Is that done through an entity? Is that done through individuals? Who borrows the money? Who provides the security? And then what are the relationships between all those different entities? So you've got lots of different options. Could be mum and dad buy it. Could be some children get brought into it. Siblings might buy it. Could be a trust. Could be a company. So there's lots of different options. But it's really about just identifying. Structuring is all about identifying what's the most appropriate entity to be owning the asset and carrying on the business, looking at what your goals and plans are in the long term. So that's really what structuring means. What you're trying to achieve with your structuring, depending on the family, but what we typically see families looking for, they're trying to fit in asset protection into the way they're holding their assets. So protecting the family wealth from attack from outside of the family, protecting family assets from the risk associated with different assets. So you might have a feedlot which has a lot of risk associated with it, and then you've just got some grazy country which doesn't have much risk involved at all. So maybe have them owned by a separate entity so that you don't get, you're quarantining the risk, basically. Maybe separate your operating entity from your land holding entity to separate those two risks. Don't put all your eggs in the one basket. So make it a lot easier to transfer things in the future. Do you want flexibility about the way things are going to go in the future, or do you want to hardwire the way property is going to be transferred in the future? Should we think about managing tax if you ever sell the property, and what costs you're going to have, what costs you're going to face if you need to transfer this property onto the next generation while it's still alive? So they're kind of all in the big basket of issues which structuring can deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. And, many times, Michael, and, we both speak to lots of people, and it's amazing how many people have their business in the same entity as they have their land, don't they? So when it comes to structuring, there's one structure. And
that's right.
In its simplest, it might be a partnership or something, and they've decided, I got married, so we went out and we're working hard together. So we bought our land and put it in our names, and we bought all these cattle and we put them in our names. And we went out and bought a big header and we put that in our names, and so on. And so you've touched on it, but I mean, one of the biggest issues, isn't it, is creating silos around your assets, protecting them, and also taking advice. And I'm going to be brave here, and I know I've covered a few topics, so I hope you're taking notes in regard to answering these. And I'm just going to say it. Many times we strike accountants, Michael, who seem intimidated by trusts and more complicated structures than simple mum and dad partnerships. And I'd just like your thoughts in regard to how you help people who maybe have gone to their accountant. Their accountant says, "Oh, let's just keep it simple. We'll just do one tax return. Let's just buy everything in joint names." Do you strike that a bit as well?
Look, we do. So back to your first point about siloing, yeah, I think it's really important. Particularly, the world's becoming more litigious, and legal claims, the quantum of legal claims are getting higher and higher. So it's just the most simple thing you can do with your structuring is protect your family wealth, so the underlying property value, from any claims that arise in relation to your business. And whether that's claims in relation to contracts that have gone sour with a supplier or a supplier contract, or whether you have a claim from an employee, or there's any different number of problems that could arise with your business. And it's pretty tough if you lose the business entity, but it's catastrophic to the family if the actual underlying family farms then put at risk from that claim. So the first rule of structuring, from my point of view, is to separate your farming entity from your asset holding entity, just to protect that wealth. And you're right, sometimes you'll strike accountants who are reluctant to do it. And it's really about having the right advisor for where you are and where you want to go. When you start off as a young couple and you've got a block and you're running a few cows and it's not really a big show, and you're really starting out and you're trying to save every penny, well, then maybe it does make sense for you at the time just to have that all in the one partnership and keep it simple. But you've really got to keep your eye on the future, and to change it when you're halfway through the race is a lot harder. It's a lot easier to set yourself up properly from the start. Having said that, the easiest thing to do is to then put your operating entity your operating activity into a separate entity. So leave the land in mum and dad's name and put your trading activity into a company or a trust to get that asset protection in there. And if you're striking resistance with the accountant, it's really more than that's usually because it's easy to do the one tax return and have the one set of financials, and the accountant's not really looking beyond the next tax year. And you've really got to focus on the longer term than just how do we deal with next year's tax. And so that might be presenting to the accountant all of the other issues and reasons and benefits of the restructure, such as the asset protection and the ability to have a succession plan transfer in future without paying a big heap of capital gains tax. Absolutely. All those sorts of issues. And if the accountant still isn't coming on board, well then, maybe you might have outgrown that accountant. I mean, we all love our advisors and we trust them implicitly, but if they, one thing we've learned from our clients is that we've grown with them, and as their enterprises have grown and become more complex, we've just stepped up and grown with them. So if you've got an advisor who can't grow with you, then maybe, sad as it is to say, you might need to move on.
Yeah, look, that's good advice, and I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things certainly, and I guess why I do what I do, Michael, is that estate planning, succession planning, taxation planning, all those sorts of things, no one person can be the expert at everything. And I'm a great believer, if you've got something wrong, you go to a specialist. And certainly when it comes to taxation planning, I mean, whilst accountants have the sort of the run on pure taxation planning from a an estate planning point of view, a succession planning point of view, which is all tied in. You need to get some legal advice as well as your taxation advice when you're looking at creating structures, when you're looking at putting things together and so on, because there's just too many moving parts. I mean, you're absolutely right. If from a tax point of view, they'll see things from a taxation angle. You're looking at saving your clients' backside if the guy next door sues him for spray drift or something
That's
like
right.
that.
Yep.
And if everything's just in mum and dad's name and there's no protection around anything, you just need one guy to to fall off a four-wheeler or something like that on your place, and your whole livelihood is out the door. So very much agree with what you're saying.
And when we talk about asset protection, every now and then we'll have an advisor come back, accountant come back and say, oh, we've got public liability and work cover, so we're fine. But I mean, there's instances where there is a limit to that, or we know insurance companies are very profitable, and they're very profitable because they find ways of not paying out insurance claims. So they're going to be looking hard to find a way that they don't have to pay out, and there's going to be a limit there. And doctors are really great at keeping us alive, but it can be hideously expensive. So if you get someone who's a young person who's seriously injured and is going to need medical care for the rest of their life, and they've been injured because you haven't complied with your workplace health and safety obligations, then you can bet London to a brick that no insurance is going to cover the amount that's actually going to cost. It's one of those risk matrix things. What's the likelihood of it happening? Not very high. What's the impact on you if it does happen? Catastrophic. So you have to take action. The ramifications of that happening to you is just too great to ignore, in my view.
Yeah, you may or may not have seen a video I did some time ago, Michael, when I talked about the cost of doing proper estate and succession planning advice, and I put it down at 0.01% of 1% of the value of the estate. The cost of all the best advice you can get is probably 0.01 or something like that. And then I said, okay, let's flip that over. If you don't take the advice, and this is obviously not you, but those other, big city lawyers, they'll take 20 to 25% of your estate if there's a dispute after you die. Yeah. And if the kids all start fighting with each other, you can start at about $250,000, be about right. Yeah. $250,000 and work your way upwards. Will be the cost of one person fighting an estate or succession plan. So, the old ounce of prevention is certainly way better than tons and tons of cure.
That sure is. It sure is.
Yeah. Do you have? Sorry, you want to say something, Mike?
No, you're right. You keep going. Yep.
I was just going to say, have you got some examples of where you've been able to help people with good planning and it's really led to a good outcome? Because we all like to hear good stories.
That's right. We all need good stories, Mark. There's not enough good stories these days. I have one family who's like my poster family of how to do succession planning. We worked with these guys for about 15 years. When we started with them, it was mum and dad in business with two sons. And mum and dad owned absolutely everything in their own names. We did have one property which they'd come to us to once we started, first started to act for them. We had one property in a discretionary trust, but everything else was in mum and dad's name. They were irrigation, mixed farming, and cattle operations, so a diverse sort of operation. Debt over everything, cross-collateralized over everything. And so they came to us and said, well, our plan is in 15 to 20 years' time, mum and dad want to be retired, and we want to have an independent agribusiness for each child out on its own, not relying on the others. And so it was really a good example of this plan early, plan often, plan together. So the family set their plan. This is what we want to achieve. And then over those years worked with us, worked with their accountant, worked with their financial planner, worked with their bank to make that happen. So we identified that there weren't enough assets, so they went and bought another place. We identified what the farming aggregations might be that were going to be separated. So the accountant and us worked together on the tax, and the tax laws the capital gains tax laws actually changed, through that. So that's the plan often. Each time something changed, we'd all come back together, review it, see how it looks, get the bank involved, get the accountant involved. The stamp duty laws changed, which gave us a few more options as to how we could access some stamp duty exemptions. And so progressively properties were transferred, business was transferred. We had to change the structure of the business partway through to make sure we could still access the capital gains tax concessions. So just through regularly reviewing it, having a roadmap of where we wanted to get to, involving all of the advisors. Last year, we've got the two sons set up in their own agribusinesses, completely independent of one another.
Perfect.
Viable businesses. Mum and Dad's retirement is secured. They're not relying on the farms, for their retirement. And as you say, everyone's meeting for Christmas dinner, so it's absolutely perfect. And that was because they started early. They got advice from all the advisors they needed to, and they just kept coming back to it all the time. Anytime anything significant changed or happened, to see, well, how does this affect the plan? So it's a perfect example of how it's done properly. Yeah.
I'm going to stop the interview right there, Michael. Nothing can beat that.
Unfortunately, they don't all go that way, but that one, it was the perfect client. It all just worked well. Yeah.
No, that's right. And the trick is that, I use the analogy. It's like when people get their wills done. You don't get your will done, throw it in your top drawer, and then think that you're right for the rest of your life, because
that's right.
Things happen, things change. People get up, they get married. They get married, they get divorced, they have children, they buy more properties, and all these sorts of things. So you have to continually review what you've put in place. And look, if for the next 3 years nothing needs to change, fantastic. But at least you know. But in the fourth year, there could be 10 things that have happened, and you really need to get in there with a chisel and make a whole lot of changes to take into account what might have happened over those last few months. And
that's right.
I love that story, because she took into account and talked about how it really is a team approach, and no one person has a mortgage on every bit of knowledge about every area. We work with yourself. We work with financial planners. We work with counsellors. Sometimes there's some mental resilience issues and so on that need to be taken care of as well to bring the family together. And yes, I agree with you. The outcome is everyone gets together at Christmas as mates.
That's right. And it's a really important point you make there, Mark, about getting all the advisors involved. Things are just becoming more and more complicated. And having someone like you and running your kind of program can be really beneficial for those families where it is a bit more complicated, because you do have to it's great to have someone who's mustering everybody and making sure that all of these people are getting brought in at the right time, because no one person can do it on their own, and having someone there making sure that all the right people are getting brought in at the right time, it just helps the family so much.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's and sometimes it is a muster. Just ask the ladies in my office trying to muster them. It really is the case. Look, as I said, I love that story, and I don't want to talk anymore. But I do have to ask you. You also, and people need to be aware, there are bad examples as well. And like I use the example, this much to cost to get your estate and succession planning done before you die. This much cost after. So what's you've obviously got a worst case story here. Let's
well, we've got a recent one that's come to us which kind of highlights the problems. So we've just had an accountant refer a new client to us from their existing lawyer, because the mum and dad, they're looking to retire, and they've got two kids who are keen to take on the farming operation. So mum and dad come into the accountant and say, right, we want to do our succession planning. Let's transfer all these properties over. And the accountant has a look at it and says, well, all these properties are in your name. This is going to cost you millions of dollars in capital gains tax to transfer these properties over. So the family just can't do any more. They can't transfer anything. They just cannot afford the tax to transfer these properties over. Dad's he's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so he's early stages. So his prognosis is not good. He's going to, his capacity is going to reduce over time. And the family operation has debt, and they rely on that debt, which is secured against Dad's assets. So what's going to happen there is the bank is eventually going to be fairly reluctant to fund the family operation, because they're not going to want to rely on a guarantee and a mortgage from Dad, because he doesn't have capacity. He won't have capacity. He won't understand what the guarantee and the mortgage is. So the family's going to gradually run out of money because the bank won't be interested in funding against dad's security. They can't transfer the property to anyone else because they can't afford the tax. And so they just can't understand. They left their lawyer because they said, why did you let us do this? Like, it was pretty much the example you said at the start there. We've bought properties, in the last 5 years, and you let us buy them in our own name, and now we've got this horrendous capital gains tax problem, and we just can't do the succession planning at all. So they're in a real bind. The family is cohesive, but the pressure that's going to come on them, as dad loses his capacity and things get difficult, it's just sad to see. And had they got good advice at the time they're buying the properties, they could have bought them in a discretionary trust, and if dad loses capacity, transfer just controls over to mum or to the kids, and on you go. You keep going. So it sounds like a really simple solution. Wouldn't have cost much at all to get that advice and to set the trusts up, and the family would have just continued, and they could have just focused on helping dad, in his through this what he's going to be facing. But instead, they're all kind of around the kitchen table wringing their hands, wondering how they manage it. So that's a story of how simple planning would have helped a lot. Yeah.
People, Michael, people often ask, and they say, when is the best time? When's the best time to do all this stuff? When's the best time to sit down and have the conversation? There is no answer apart from right now. And
straight away.
Whatever you think, now is the right time.
I agree.
You've probably left it too long anyway. But I mean, don't leave it any longer. I have this very very complicated mathematical equation. It's called the exponential grief curve. And
yes,
the longer you leave it, every year you leave it, it doubles, triples, quadruples, sextuples, whatever the word is after that. Any day, any month, any year you leave it a little bit longer, something goes wrong. I always talk about people will say, oh, but the kids are still at school, or the kids are they're just out of school and they don't really know what they want to do yet. And well, the truth is, you need to set this up before they all start getting married and having their own children, so that anyone who comes into the family, the rules are already in place. Everyone knows this is how it's structured. This is how mum and dad have set it up. Where we have issues around, we want to protect the asset to keep it in the bloodline. So if you've got thoughts of coming in and ripping me off for half the property, you can forget those now. But I mean, it needs to be out there, and but the kids need to be educated too. And mum and dad, come back and start with the communication. The problem is parents don't communicate enough. But assuming they did, you need to have that conversation, that communication with your children, so that everyone's on the same page and everyone knows what the plan is. It's kind of say you've got a documented plan for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and so on. So yes, the sooner you can do it, the better, and it's going to cost you less now than it's going to cost you in 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, because the problems just get bigger the longer that you leave it.
I think one thing that probably stops people from getting the advice is they don't know what the end plan is. And you don't have to know what the end plan is. You just make sure that your structure gives you the flexibility to change the plan as you go. So, and that's where something like discretionary trust is fantastic, because you can transfer control of that through family members relatively easy. But if you've got the title in your own name, that's when trouble strikes. And particularly if you bring the kids into ownership of the property, well, then that makes it even harder, because as soon as you got your name on a title, that's yours and that's an entitlement. So if, in the view of the child, often, so if the plan changes and that property actually has to go a different direction, you'll often strike difficulty in convincing the child whose name is on the title that shouldn't be theirs, that needs to go in a different direction. So my summary there is, you don't have to know what the end goal is. Just get your structuring set up so that you can change it as you go, as you need to.
Have a tank full of fuel before you leave. You don't need to know where you're going.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, look, we had a chat before too, Michael. I was talking about, I've heard a few people tell stories recently about how well they've done their estate planning and their succession planning and all that sort of stuff. And I sit down, I think, well, that worked for you, and that's great. But we all know that when somebody dies, the world turns to custard for everybody. People who have beautiful, loving, happy families where no one would ever leave or do anything wrong, and that they'd always look after their brothers and sisters. That's great while mum and dad are around, but as soon as mum and dad die, it really, I just watch it all the time, and everything turns to custard. And one of the things I'd like to ask you is if and people do, family members who you'd never think of it as happening will contest the will, normally driven by their spouse. I'll admit, sometimes there's a lot of pressure from behind the scenes, but if your mum and dad and you're looking at your succession plan and you're watching the family come through, and you're concerned about someone in the family that may contest the will or maybe push to contest the will, what's your strategy? What are your thoughts in regard to how you make sure that's a no-brainer?
Yep. So there's no silver bullet. It's really bringing all of those strategies and all of those skills into play. So first of all, you said it at first, communication really helps.
Yep.
No surprises. Surprises are estate plan killers. So if the kids don't know what's happening until dad dies, you can be guaranteed there's going to be a blue. So communication, no surprises. Have a clear, if you've got a plan, make that plan clear to the whole family. Get someone to help you communicate that plan to the family if you need to, if you're having trouble talking to the kids about it, and who's going to help communicate what the plan is and what the rationale for it is. If you can get the family on side, have them all sign up to a succession plan where they all agree that this is fair and equitable, and they agree to honour it. It's not necessarily going to be bulletproof or guarantee you won't have someone trying to contest the will later, but it's pretty strong evidence in favour of the child trying to enforce it that the court should not depart from it. So get your succession plan in place after proper communication, facilitation, and then see if you can, if the plan requires the transfer of property, see if you can either hardwire the transfer of that property so it happens automatically on the death of mum or dad if they own the property, either by hardwiring transfer of control of the entity that owns it, those sorts of things. Get assets, if you're really worried about it, try and get the assets out of mum and dad's name into another entity, so that you're reducing the value of the estate, so there's less there to be claimed against. And in New South Wales, there's a fantastic thing called a Section 95 release, which means if the family all agrees with the plan, you can get a court order whereby the family agrees that no one's going to contest the will when mum and dad dies. So it's a real, if you can get agreement, get one of those signed up, once again, only in New South Wales, but it provides that protection. So there's lots of things you can do, but just the succession planning via will and not talking to anyone about it, that's a guarantee. That's a guarantee. Someone's going to court.
That's right. Well, you're only a few metres from New South Wales, so you'd know all that stuff, Michael.
That's right. Yeah, no, we get to play both sides of the border, so we get those things.
No,
just
that's right.
another short thing on wills. We used to see, the off-farm children might be prepared to put up with the on-farm child getting the asset, because they're going to work long and hard and they deserve it. What we've seen property prices do in the last 5 years makes that much less likely, because now the value of the asset is just too large for the off-farm child to stomach. The on-farm child's not going to make any more money out of it. But they can't, the off-farm children think, why should that child get $15 million and I get some loose change? So it's made it a lot harder, and I think it made it a lot more likely that we'll see more will contests in the future. There's just that much more money to be fighting over.
Yeah, look, totally. I just want to reiterate what you were saying, Michael. I mean, communication is the biggest issue, and it needs to happen from outside the family. I often say to people, don't try and do this inside the family. You know, don't do it with the accountant who knows you too intimately as well, because you know he's dealing with you all the time. They'll have preferences and prejudices and so on. Get someone independent to come in, have a conversation, have that conversation independently with each person. Don't. I'm not a great fan in the early stages of planning of having family meetings where everyone's there, because some are quiet, some are noisy, and some don't want to disagree with what mum and dad may say, so they just sit there quietly. I think what I like to do is to talk to everyone individually, find out what everyone's thoughts and feelings are and desires for the future, and then you can come back to the parents without breaking confidences necessarily, but come back and say, okay, this is the way I think you should structure what you're trying to achieve, and you're going to create harmony. Then when you're through the planning, or most of the way through the planning, then get everyone together and have a conversation and say, okay, this is what we've decided to do. Any problems? And it's not like you guarantee where you're signing something in New South Wales that you're talking about, but I think if you sit everyone in the family down and you give everyone the opportunity to have a conversation and say what they really think, knowing what mum and dad have got planned, very, very hard afterwards for them to be overly aggressive in regard to what may come out of the estate plan if it's been discussed. So
definitely,
communication. I just say that all the time. If there's one word to describe what we do, it's opening up communicate. That's three. Communication. That's fun. If I
got a couple for free.
Open up communication.
No, I agree. It can solve so many, identifies problems and allows you to solve them early rather than trying to solve them when a family member's passed away, which is it's too late then.
Yeah. Michael, great chatting with you again. Our time's up today, but love having conversations with you, and really I was looking forward to this because structuring, and I mean structuring, you're talking about individual ownership, partnerships, companies, and trusts, and working out which is the most appropriate for people. And so getting your structuring right in the first place is just so important. So thanks for your time, Michael. Look forward to seeing you out at Gundy again one of these days soon, and all the best. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mark. Really enjoyed it. Talk to you again soon.
Okay, see you, buddy.
Bye.